You can say that music is heavy because of the way it sounds, but for me it comes from more like the experience of the people making it. That's what makes it heavy.
I'd rather be high or die than live, you know, that kind of stuff.
I mean, you can have an acoustic guitar and one vocal, and it can be the heaviest thing in the world.
Heavy's about being pissed off and being a warlord and laying down, like, just like someone like that was in battle, just if they had an axe and just chop some dude in the head and it landed, and you have a riff that plays the same way that way, that's heavy.
When the Beatles first came to America, they had these tiny little amplifiers. You couldn't hear anything except girls screaming. That all changed when like Marshall and Laney and Orange started making these big, giant, high wattage amplifiers that all of a sudden, you know, shut the entire crowd up. A large part of early hard rock music is just trying to make sense of what you do with all this distortion and all this volume.
There's things you can do with a clean reverb tone that are so evil and dark. It makes Black Sabbath sound like, you know, Peggy Lee.
People are starting to realize it's like there's moving away from that idea of it's just being like headbanging or whatever, devil horns, heavy rock music. We're making weird shit.
So how are we going to get this sound? How we can put them in a closet, a small space? Like, come on, got to put them in a coffin, you know, see what kind of vocal performance we can get and also what kind of tone we can get out of this.
A flatted fifth is a lot heavier than like a... What about... You know what I mean?
It's down to earth, it's oftentimes raw, and it's real.
When you get really technically proficient, that sucks the soul out of rock and roll.
When somebody really has something to say, and I'm not saying verbally necessarily, but emotionally, it comes out of the music and it just hits you. That's heavy music to me. It doesn't necessarily have to be all about loud guitars, even though I love loud guitars.
It seems like heavy in the modern idiom is always like something with distortion and a lot of volume and some sort of reference to the first heavy bands, you know, Black Sabbath and Blue Cheer, Led Zeppelin.
The whole experience of coming of age in the early 1970s was very tense and rife with problems that mainstream entertainment wasn't addressing, and definitely not even mainstream pop music.
I would love to go back to the 70s and relive it because, I mean, you had Black Sabbath at their peak, you had Captain Beyond, you had Uriah Heep, you had Deep Purple and Rock, you had Mountain, you had Grand Funk, you had the Stooges, you had, you know, Atomic Rooster, Dust, the Groundhog, Stray, all these incredible bands.
Since '72, it's actually been done.
Downhill.
Yeah, after Volume 4 was released. Sabbath, unnecessary point of discussion.
I keep referring back to Hawkwind because they were a really big influence on me back in the day.
Somewhere in the Green River days, discovered Hawkwind, and have been in love with like those first 4 or 5 records ever since.
Mountain, Zeppelin, Free.
Like all kids our age, and then Kyuss.
We had all the Dictators records.
James Gang, Joe Walsh, Neil Young,
Leaf Hound, or
Mahavishnu Orchestra.
Gentle Giant, Clinton.
Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper was like the first cool record I ever got.
Of course I like Sabbath, but I mean, that's the obvious.
They know Sabbath, and it's great, but Sabbath is played out.
A lot of the bands that we were into, Bobby and I specifically were into, were these, what I call like B-level bands or C-level bands like Dust, Lord Baltimore.
Sir Lord Baltimore, I mean, I didn't know they existed until a couple years ago, and I heard it, and I just started cracking up because it's fucking gnarly.
You know, you play these records that were just, you know, oh, that's not Steely Dan, it's not, you know, that's not Heart, it's not Barracuda, it's not Supertramp.
You know, in a way, Black Sabbath was never on the radio, but people went to gigs, and I think that's why there was more money for those bands touring. And they could get known, they could sell platinum without ever getting on the radio.
In the 70s, there was a lot more regional hard rock. There were bands like Pentagram in Washington, D.C. that weren't part of the major label system.
Pentagram formed in late 71.
Bobby was the first. I will tell you that right now. Bobby Liebling was the first.
Literally, one night, Bobby and I were sitting at a friend's house, getting stoned like we did just about every night. And we said, you know, why don't we put together a band that is exactly what we both want to do? During the time I was in the band, 71 to 76, I'd say we were a hard rock band, you know, maybe a heavy hard rock band, but we weren't a heavy metal band. We didn't want to play clubs because clubs didn't want us to play in them because we didn't do covers. If you listen to Bobby's songs, they were creative, incredibly inventive songs with weird beat changes and weird chord progressions and weird times and stuff. But the labels would say this isn't radio friendly. We can't sell this. You know, we don't hear a single.
And these are gonna be some of my last days here.
We wanted to just record our own material and go straight to getting signed. And so we had various managers who stuck with us for various periods of time that would, you know, take us into the studio, pay for the sessions, and try and get us a record label deal. And each time they failed.
Lieber and Krebs in Columbia, they wanted Bobby. And eventually Bobby got some kind of big audition in New York City at a big studio.
That was the straw that definitely caused a lot of severe damage to the camel's back because Bobby basically blew our Columbia Records deal. We wanted to do a better vocal, but the guy who was paying for our sessions, Columbia Records, said don't worry about it, and that should have been the end of the subject, and Bobby wanted his way, and so there you go. That was the end of Columbia Records.
The problem really became the drugs. And Bobby got a bad reputation. And Bobby really sat on the edge of being a fucking legendary rock star his entire life.
Pentagram I missed the first time around. I think their records were almost impossible to find. And I didn't even hear about Pentagram until their records started getting reissued.
Bobby had all this stuff, and believe it or not, even back then, this stuff was, even though it was 8-track, sometimes even 4-track, it was amazing quality.
Bobby had worked out a deal with Relapse, and they were going to put out this compilation of a lot of our 70s demos, the studio demos we'd done with the various managers. I love the Pentagram stuff in the 80s and 90s, and I'm really proud of Bobby for keeping Pentagram going for all these years, because you know, if he hadn't kept the band going, you wouldn't be talking to me right now.
got like a basic structure, you know, you got the skeleton, but then there's like so much space. You know, those parts last, you know, maybe 5-10 minutes in a run, and then we'll just like go off for like 20 minutes, and it's always going to be different. It's just jamming.
It's always playing off each other, and like, you know, I always call it the cosmic nod.
I think it's a very spiritual thing, especially, I mean, like for us when we play, definitely, I mean, at length, that way where we can, you know, I'm maybe write a note for 5 minutes and just kind of noodle over it, and it does give you room to think and just kind of explore what's going on in your head, let you drift off.
We talked about it and we're like, well, should we try and write some songs and just, you know, or should we get a singer? And we just kind of said, well, we kind of like it how it is.
Metal in the 80s became very formula.
All you need to do is look at Judas Priest's Turbo album and compare that to, you know, things like Stained Glass and Sin After Sin, and you can see what happened to music in the 80s.
Early psychedelic hard rock ended when the drug of choice became cocaine. All of the negative aspects of studio recording are amplified by cocaine use, by the engineers, the producers, the musicians.
Well, a lot of it hinged on production and just sounding just exactly so in the studio. And then you had your weird underground stuff.
Lay down your soul to the gods, rock and roll.
You know, maybe Venom. Metallica was kind of straddling the punk and metal thing.
So I wasn't really part of like the whole Ozzy Osbourne, like Judas Priest crap.
You didn't really have punks going to metal shows or metal people going to punk shows. And then around, 84, 85, the line started to get blurred a little bit.
There was a defining moment, actually, when the Obsessed was accepted by the punk community. And that's like when we played this little bar with Iron Cross and the PA went out. And instead of stopping, we just played our whole set with no PA and just fucking like screamed in the air and played everything like twice as fast. After that, Sab said to me, okay, no, I know you guys are for real.
I think a lot of the DC hardcore bands were kind of what got me into doing it. Bands like Early Rites of Spring and Void and Nation of Ulysses.
Somebody told me, if you think Metallica's fast, you should check out DRI, and the COC and some of these other hardcore bands from the early 80s.
The very first time we saw the Melvins, I realized that a band can completely clear a room or completely change somebody's life.
Faster, 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 and then the Melvins came along from you. Like, awesome!
Motorhead doesn't get enough credit, I would say that, because they were the first real punk metal hybrid.
Corrosion were a perfect example of that. St. Vitus were a perfect example of that, But even Black Flag was, except Black Flag was so popular that their fans were willing to go to the shows anyway just to hear stuff from My War.
Black Flag played in the desert probably around 1981.
The desert, even so now, but more so 15, 20 years ago, was primarily a retirement community.
It's like a vacuum of music culture.
There was no question of going to LA. I never went to LA. I mean, if I went to Palm Springs, that was like a big thing.
There was no record store packing, Maximum Rock and Roll or Flipside.
It was all about the desert, and it wasn't something we celebrated. Maybe like it might be today.
The desert is a place for the newlywed and the nearly dead. I mean, it's that place. The bands were coming, and there were like punk rock bands that were developing out there. The earlier ones were like Dead Issue and Scabies Babies.
There was a band called Dead Issue that I was a part of. That became Across the River with Mario Lally. Alfredo Hernandez was also in that band, and he played in Kyuss for a while, and Queens of the Stone Age.
There were a few other people, but I would say the earliest nucleus of, if you want to say Across the River, was like one of the ones that I just remember so vividly. That was like a moment of change.
The whole SST scene, that was like our idols. Black Flag, Meat Puppets, Minutemen, October Faction.
These are their hot peppers here. There's these look like some kind of banana peppers there. These are Thai dragons. When these turn red, man, these motherfuckers are hotter than hell.
What is doom? First of all, but my understanding of the style of music that we want to call doom is kind of just like I've said before, just like a gut, like a real visceral, emotional pull. Something that'll make you cry. When I really moved into like a concrete form of I'm in a doom band, definitely with St. Vitus.
We played a few shows with St. Vitus when they had their old singer, Scott Riegers. And then they got the new guy, Wino. His first show was on my 21st birthday in 1986 at this little community center in Palm Desert. DRI, St. Vitus, and Across the River. It always felt like Across the River was onto something really special. have albums by everything from Mountain to Black Sabbath, early Metallica, just all kinds of stuff. And we were kind of combining that with the feelings that we got from punk rock.
Speakers just fucking melting in front of you, and I loved that sound. And so we started going back, and instead of just it was slower, slow down, volume, saturation, blues.
They like just alienated themselves from that whole game of like playing fast and you know, and riffing around and gnarly, like the whole punk metal thing. They just bypassed that, went straight to rock. No one was really doing that.
Towards the end of Across the River, Soundgarden was starting to make waves in Seattle, and they were actually part of SST. You know, the same kind of stuff was brewing up there that was brewing out here.
Everybody knew me as a singer for St. Vitus, but nobody knew I played guitar. And so, it's kind of an interesting situation where I think it was Scott and Mario's original band, Across the River.
We jammed at a party, a generator party, out near Ventura by the beach. And I was playing drums, he was playing guitar. I didn't know he could play guitar. And Mario Lolly was playing bass. And we did this crazy jam. And afterwards, we were like, man, we gotta do a fucking band one of these days.
Called up Scott, and we agreed to forge ahead as The Obsessed. And so that's what we did. It was me, Scott Reeder, and Greg Rogers. Not soon after that, after struggling a little bit here and there, Scott Reeder left to join Kyuss. That's when Kyuss basically exploded.
They were like the only band in the desert, like touring and doing it, you know.
They were the ones that like basically started perpetuating like our universe out there. They were like the template. I mean, if there was like a blueprint for, you know, desert rock, I guess they would be it.
Guys like Mario Lally and Kyuss really took the next step by not only saying, you know, we're insulated, so maybe we don't know what the hip thing is elsewhere, but they actually embraced that and said, well, not only are we going to reject what the hip thing is, we're going to reject the masses at the same time. We're going to reject all of it.
I mean, I hate to say it, but I mean, a lot of it had to do with we just started smoking grass, you know. You take a group of kids that are digging, you know, aggressive music and certainly like hardcore punk, and they start smoking dope. An interesting thing happens, you know. That's an interesting music.
Truth fiction, stranger than any lie. Smooth convictions, danger plan, a twisted night.
What happened to The Obsessed is that thrash hit. Slayer and that type of music was just too big. That was it. I mean, that's what the 80s became. Either you were a hair band or you were a thrash band.
If anybody deserved to be a rock star, it'd be that guy.
Yeah. It's like heaven.
You're cursed to be in the underground. There's no way out. You're just gonna be there, no matter what. But people love you because you stayed that way, because you stuck to your guns and never stopped playing what you play, you know?
We formed Comets in 1999, then Flashman and I formed the group in Santa Cruz, California. You know, he and I were into just like anthemic rock music, you know, grand funk and some punk rock stuff in this. It's just kind of old favorites and stuff like that. And we were just sort of beginning to kind of get into, you know, further out stuff like, you know, free jazz, really start to delve into the meat of Coltrane and Abadila and the free jazz stuff.
Oh, so it's not just a synth that makes one sound.
No, it's for your synth.
It's an effects.
It's effects for horns.
Sick. Yeah. So you can put the bassoon effect on your trumpet or whatever.
Yeah. You could do full-on Morricone scores with this thing, just with one sack.
You know, our original mission was to try to put those two different things that usually don't go together.
We're definitely trying to do something more than just ape the psychedelic sound or whatever, but, you know, trying to do something more than just be trippy or stoned or, you know, these kinds of things. Are we a psychedelic band? Yeah.
Back in the Kyuss days, the term stoner rock didn't exist. It was usually filed under metal, which was kind of offensive to us at the time.
To be honest with you, I've just never really been concerned about or personally use classifications like that. If people ask me what kind of band Ghost Ink was, I was just like, it's like a heavy rock band, you know?
Couldn't call it grunge and they couldn't call it metal. Couldn't call it punk, so they had to come up with some kind of name for it. And I mean, to me, it's just regular hard rock.
Well, stoner rock is a drag as a label for people that don't get stoned, because it kind of is a ticket for them to dismiss the music.
Nowadays, when you say stoner rock, you know exactly what that means. You know, it's like fuzzed out guitars, like huge riffs. It's like melodic to a certain extent, most of it. But in a rock and roll way that sort of echoes the classic rock.
I've always said stoner rock is just grunge, and really both of them are just 70s heavy rock continued.
Monster Magnet, Fu Manchu, Kyuss, and, you know, we're doing something in like 93, 94. Then it was like coming out of grunge, You know, it was darker, more heavy psychedelic, weird shit in it, you know, Spine of God. But by the time they caught on, you know, bands were changing, like Nebula was changing, Queens of the Stone Age were changing, and they're still trying to call it stoner rock.
There's the whole like sort of musician magazine aspect to a lot of that stuff of like what's the equipment you're using and how's it being recorded, and you know, we're not going to go digital, and we're going to have like these warm sounding amplifiers and use tubes and all that kind of stuff.
I wasn't really connected to the desert scene as the desert scene was happening. We did get connected to it after Man's Ruin because we were all on the same record label together.
You know, I think it's probably fair to say that, you know, Man's Ruin Records really is responsible for introducing people to a lot of this music.
I happened to cover all of those bands for the first issue because I was doing it sort of like a coverage on Man's Ruin, that genre of music that, you know, was described as stoner rock, which is kind of an unfortunate moniker that it got. After that, there's just this huge influx of bands, you know, sort of copying that sound.
I don't really know where the term came from. I'll be honest, I haven't researched it, but I assume it's. I'm guessing it's just music. It's just kind of jammy and I hate to use it organic, but I will organic. I don't know, what is stoner rock? You tell me.
Fatso Jetson came out of our rock and roll club me and Larry opened as a result of getting tired of getting busted doing generator parties and knowing that we could do it ourselves.
August of 1994. We were all major Black Flag fans, and you know, Black Flag was a real inspiration to all of us, and we figured, hey, let's, you know, sort of throw ourselves at the bottom of the bill, you know, when Greg Ginn plays in town. And we did, and we played, and that was our first show. And Greg, I guess, really liked what we were doing, and, you know, offered to put a record out for us on SST.
Blues music, for me, the rawness and the honesty of it is, to me, similar to the beautiful things about that I enjoy of punk rock. It's not unusual for me to you know, within the same song to want to experience Howlin' Wolf, Black Flag, Link Ray, and Devo.
It's very primitive. You know, we put out records and we play, and you know, and in that sense, it's really pure. You know, it's like we do it on our own terms, and it's not about, like, you know, surviving. It's about, you know, quality of life.
remember the scene in San Francisco in the 90s being, Sleep, Neurosis, Grotus, the Melvins.
There was a lot of like crusty stuff coming up, like, well, Neurosis was the biggest thing around here then. Neurosis and the Melvins, like, that was the center of everything.
I started jamming with this band in high school, which is actually Al and Chris, who are in Ohm right now. They had this band, As Best As Death.
They really wanted to be in a band. Probably a reaction from misery in life, you know? I don't know. There was a friendship, and, you know, Sleep in large part, it was a three really good friends, and music came out of that.
And me and Al were just sitting around on LSD or doing bong hits or something, and Al came up with Sleep. So, wow, that's a great name or whatever.
It was more than just going to see a show. It was like an experience that would, you know, nail you from the center of you.
Yeah, it was massive. I'd never seen anything like it.
You know, it's like red, green, blue, sleep.
They had put out 2 records, Volume 1, Holy Mountain. And then they got signed to a major label, London Records. And I don't really know that London Records knew what they were gonna get, because Sleep was sort of planning their, for lack of a better term, their masterpiece. It was one 52-minute song. Jerusalem, I guess it was originally called Dope Smoker, but the lyrics sort of incorporated this sort of like bong-huffing caravan through the Holy Land.
This was like 5 years that the song developed.
They had the whole thing written, and it got tied up with like record label wranglings. Basically, they were sitting on this thing, it was ready to go, and it was like dying on the vine, pretty much, you know? It's like they wanted to get it out there and they couldn't, and I think they had to wait like a year before they could even record it.
For at least like a 2-year period, they refused to play that song live because they were so convicted about people not hearing it yet.
We tried to stop the song, and it just felt all awkward, like it was supposed to have kept going, and it was just us finding, how do we set this thing back to the ground? How does it land?
Sometimes the riff is just so fucking good that you just want to hear it over and over and over again. Sometimes for 52 minutes, you know?
As far as I know, London knew the whole time about their plans for this song.
We started fucking with like just kind of these weird, like kind of almost Indian music scales.
A lot of the intent was conveying that hypnosis that the band would actually go into while playing it.
We let the drummer on that song like carry that song, you know what I mean? Oh, that whole song's based off drums and timing and hitting in the right spot.
There are a lot of myths, legends, we could say, surrounding the making of Jerusalem.
Some of it might not be mythology.
The main one, I guess, is that they blew the advance on weed.
Well, the weed part's totally true. We blew a lot of money on weed and time and just the delivering the master in a skull bong. Well, no. It'd be a good idea. I wish we would have thought of it.
We were going for definitely the heaviest thing ever recorded. There was no expense spared as far as overdoing things. Like, oh, you want to put another guitar track? Let's do that, you know. Let's do 2 more.
We spent like $75,000 on amps, on custom-made amps and guitars and all sorts of stuff.
The song is a journey. I mean, not just sonically, but if you follow the lyrics, it's a caravan. It's a caravan. They're delivering weed.
It's like, do you use Lungsman and Hashishian in the same line? How do you do it? We turned that into the label, and they heard it, and they were like, man, it's too heavy. There's nothing we can do with this. It's too this, it's too that. And somebody at the label, I don't know who, got it in their mind that if they had somebody remix it, it would be that much different. Dude, you guys signed a band that with a 60-minute song, like what were you expecting? Like radio, you know?
The record got shelved. It came out like 3 years after it was recorded, which ended up being about 2.5 years after Sleep broke up. And you know, in those years it sort of became, because of in part because it really was this fantastic record, but in part because of the mystique surrounding it, it became regarded as this sort of classic record. A classic lost record, really.
Sometime shortly after the remix was done, they decided not to be a band anymore. And that was in, I think, 97.
Around 2001, 2002, Matt Pike from High on Fire, who was also in Sleep, his manager Todd asked me if I wanted to do the real version of that album, which was Dope Smoker, which is the full-on, you know, unedited, unmixed, you know, unmixed by Sardi, who they brought in there to clean it up, and obviously they weren't even happy with that. They asked me if I wanted to put it out, and I said absolutely.
I liked the Dope Smoker version because it was a little longer, and it was the mix that we did with Billy. You know, it wasn't, no one else came in from the record company and chopped it all up.
I think the three of us have made peace with the song that we know to exist inside versus what's out there and what people think the song really is. And I think that's been the way that all three of us have continued and put that to rest.
You know, it's that sort of like that lifelong battle between like art and what record companies perceive as product.
Were you guys estranged for a while after Sleep as a result of that?
Here and there. Here and there.
All of us were.
Yeah. There's a lot of pain and didn't know quite what to say to each other, and there was still love, and there was love and hate and confusion, and we just had to sort it out for a while.
I didn't talk to Chris for a number of years after the whole Dope Smoker thing, but and then Al, it was a very sad thing actually. Al stopped playing music altogether for 5 years. I won't say altogether, but he wasn't very public about like seeing anybody or, you know, being in a band or anything like that.
I think Sleep was almost the quintessential of this sort of this revival that started happening in the early 90s of what became called stoner rock or doom or whatever. You know, I mean, they kind of picked up what St. Vitus was doing and the Melvins and Black Sabbath, of course. But I think they kind of nailed it. I mean, it could almost be said that they got it and made a couple of the greatest of the albums that needed to be made in that genre.
Determined from the first jam that we had as Ohm that there wasn't any other element necessary to what we were going for. Didn't need to go into traditional, you know, structures and get a guitar for the sake of fitting into some preordained sound. It comes in moments where I'm stopped and I have to jot down the emotional feeling into words that serve not only symbolic purposes but on a very practical level, rhythmic purposes. They're certainly not assembled with a view of grammatical soundness. Sometimes people say, don't you know any other riff? And say, well, pay attention closely, because they're all varied. The repetition that we do also, there were things in, even on some of the earliest albums that we listened to and grew up appreciating, we would hear segments in these songs and would say to ourselves, God, why doesn't that repeat some more? I wish that would go on for 14, 15 minutes. It should.
Drugs can really make you write a song or do anything. If anything, they make you not. It's not until you like kind of get solid
and come down somewhat.
Yeah.
To get anything done.
Weed has something to do with listening.
It definitely, yeah.
Not playing,
but
helps. Listening.
Yeah. Just what works for me is using it just as a verifying tool. It sort of, in a musical sense, dilates parts of your mind.
Plants are alive, and I feel like I've been communicated with, you know, like through these things. I mean, if there's a way to communicate between species, then that's probably it.
By altering your perception, you can see things slightly different, you know, and it's good in a way, but it's not necessary, or it's not, in the end, I think, what it's about.
You know, it's an essential part of what we do. This isn't actually going to be on film.
It may be about the journey, the quintessential journey, you know, or the idea of traveling into different realms, but that may include drug taking, but it's not limited to drug taking.
People like H.P. Lovecraft, Lord Dunsany, Clark Ashton Smith, all these writers from the 30s and turn of the century that were really into imagination, almost for imagination's sake.
Especially as times get heavier or more politically dire, you typically see more fantasy. You see more artists like reveling in idealism or in their own personal fantasies. It takes motivation and dedication to write songs and get into a recording studio and dedicate your life to making music with a band, and I don't think the average stoner really gets that far into it.
We all grew up outside of the city, or Steve and I grew up in Virginia for him and Maryland for me. But just that time when you realize how much music comes from DC and was coming out of DC, you know, with the whole punk scene and Fugazi and that whole Discord world of music that was going on all through the 80s. We were in those kind of bands for a while, and we just felt the need to go back to what originally got us so excited about music in junior high, bands like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, bands that, really laid back and had a whole mood and a vibe that could really carry the listener away.
We're here mixing and actually recording. We did some tracking here too. Our 5th record at Sunset Sound, legendary studio on Sunset Strip in Hollywood. There's a lot of talk about bands that are kind of like doing a lot of like classic rock sort of stuff at this point, and we kind of wanted to just kind of go back to the very basics where a lot of that stuff was done.
All our records in the past have been heavily overdubbed with a lot of different atmosphere and effects, and now we're kind of trying to capture more of the performance. Just like spontaneous and more raw.
Like a lot of the music I write is thinking about images, like forest, ocean, stars, walking.
Heavy weather or, you know, big, massive trees or cliffs or, you know, it's definitely an earthy kind of relation.
Trees are so beautiful that make you feel happy, and they seem so ancient and old and have such a giant story to tell.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is an element in our music involving nature and spirituality, I guess, and those are like the two heaviest things there are.
My mother was into like illustrating stuff from nature, like she would draw mushrooms and plants and flowers, and so that was sort of surrounded me when I was a kid, and you know, I find that stuff really inspirational.
Sound and sight are very similar and always have a relationship to each other, to me. Whether it's watching a musician play or listening to an album and looking at the artwork.
Homemade posters are coming back into style. I think it's a rejection of corporate art, you know, the corporate masterminding of the look of the band.
I actually sit down with it on headphones and really concentrate on it and give it a real run through where I hear it and close my eyes or concentrate on it and see what happens, you know, if anything comes to me.
I mean, I didn't really like any music graphics back in the 90s. I really was not into that, you know, vampire girls and sort of characters with big heads. And yeah, I mean, I guess like that whole Kozic and Coop style.
I do a lot of horizon and sky things because to me that really represents this wideness, this infinite range of possibilities. And where the sky meets the ocean, I always saw that as being kind of like this almost portal or gateway into something else.
You know, thinking about like what makes psychedelic music, you know, like comparing it to art, I think it's like anything that's super really far out and creative. Some of the record covers I really kind of got into it and trying to make that like multi-level creation.
Io penso che la psichedelia di Malleus stia nel suo disegnare e interpretare la donna.
Non c'è la donna materna, la donna buona, forse la donna più cattiva.
Lo stesso di immaginare qualcosa è un'esplorazione mentale.
I was really into hypnosis, still am. This design team from England did a lot of stuff like Dark Side of the Moon and Led Zeppelin covers and a lot of other really significant and recognizable things. And Roger Dean, of course.
An image itself, you know, it speaks for itself, but then I really, really like letters and I really like the aesthetic of a word. This is some stuff I've been doing lately, just these couple things here, just like in the past couple weeks even. That was this year's calendar, and that's the next Residual Echoes cover.
Because I was doing very abstract kind of work that was very detailed, and I think it was a new form of psychedelia, which wasn't the flower power type, but more a very harsh, sort of almost apocalyptic version of psychedelia.
I think the word psychedelic is very interesting, and I actually think that the stuff I do is always psychedelic in the sense that it's striving to have this sort of visionary aspect to it. Stylistically, it has more in common with technical drawing or architectural drawing.
Something has a really big sound to me. It sort of looks to me like this vastness, this open space, clouds and escapes. And when it's the kind of slow, heavy thing, that's sort of what I envision. Some of the stuff I get from the faster stuff, like High on Fire, it's warlike imagery that gets the blood moving.
First album, The Art of Self-Defense, it has more of a Sleep vibe to it, but I was changing my style up, but I've been so used to playing with Sleep, I have this new rhythm section that's a little bit faster mid-tempo, but if I look back now, it's kind of slow, and it's kind of because we were evolving and finding our new selves, you know, I was finding myself guitar playing, and I just started singing. So that was all new to me. So you can hear the influence that Sleep had on me coming out of that band, at least on my playing. We started wanting to do some faster, kind of thrashier, heavier power house riffs, you know. It's like metal, but not like a typical metal band. Maybe I'm pissed off about something, or maybe I'm, you know, upset or sad, or someone fucked me over. I'll put that down on the paper, but I'll put it in a way, I'll use imagery from something I've read or something that, you know, I was interested in to convey how I feel, even though it's a complete mask. If you can transfer your feelings into a piece of music and how you feel, whether it be anger, whether it be love, sadness, anything, that's what makes a great artist, a great musician.
A lot of the records that, you know, we look back on from the 70s that are very sort of collectible, weird, obscure, you know, Groundhog's records, Sir Lord Baltimore, May Blitz, Budgie, Hawkwind, they were all on major labels at the time. None of them would be on major labels now. They would all be on indie labels. And I attribute that to the, I think it's consolidation and shrinkage of the record industry.
Screw the record companies, you know. They've just done such a shit job for the last 25 years, you know, that they don't deserve anything.
I've always been attracted to the darker side of sounds and art, which usually leads to the art being and the music being underground and independent.
People in my early youth had always told me, especially my parents had always told me, oh, you gotta play what the people want to hear. You gotta play what the people want to hear, or else, you know, you're never gonna make any money on it. And then, you know, I was just like, oh, you know, I don't care if I make any money, because I knew from the very beginning that my music was a very special gift, but it was also very special art.
I mean, we're doing things that are appalling and contrary to the mainstream, so be it. This is, you know, this is what we're doing, and we're going to keep doing it, and we don't care if it's going to make us rich and famous. We're not looking for that.
At the same time, you know, I'm starting to get older and looking at, man, I wish I did have a house. I wish I could take care and marry some girl, or, you know, you think about that when you get older.
You know, there's a lot more careerism that goes on because of the inflation and expense in having a secure lifestyle.
But money and like recording, having comfortable recording space and tour support, I'm not against that.
The bands are probably better off not being on a major label, to tell you the truth, so I wouldn't piss and moan too much about it. You'll get a nice advance, you might be able to buy yourself a house, then after that, I mean, that's if you're lucky.
Our friend Brant once called us insane hobbyists, in that, you know, we don't actively try to go out and tour, we're not actively trying to make a career out of this.
Mario's parents and my parents have been in the restaurant business longer than we've been alive.
We all moved up here trying to figure out what we were going to do, and eventually end up with a job, hopefully, in the restaurant, and still being able to make music.
I mean, I'm not planning on stopping playing music just because I'm not making any money at it. But, yeah, I mean, like, I have to supplement my income, like, every few years pretty aggressively. I think I'm going to be selling a lot of stuff soon.
Outside the band, I have a full-time job as a post-production producer in the film and video business.
They're just good old day jobs that we have. You know, for instance, I work at a flower place, you know, delivering flowers or helping set up at a wedding or whatever, driving a white van around town, you know.
We're starting to do pretty well on tour. You know, you can make some decent money, especially in towns out west in the big cities. But I personally still walk dogs. And I know Steve does artwork on the side to support himself. You know, so I wouldn't say it's quite there yet, you know, or at least sustainable. Doesn't let us live the sort of life we want, you know, which is a roof over our head, food to eat.
You painted that? Yeah. Oh my goodness, look at this. We work it out with my wife. We work it out. It made more sense for me to take care of the kids. So we decided that that's what we do, that I would effectively become stay-at-home dad. This is going to be the next generation. You know, this is going to be the next generation. This is basically how she's born. Instead of it being me being afraid of, oh my God, you know, there's going to be a nuclear war and we're going to lose them, it's more like these are going to be the people that are going to lead us out of it.
We're able to just make music.
Yeah.
We're pretty broke.
Yeah.
Destitute.
But happy.
But,
you know,
yeah. We do an odd job if we have to, if we don't tour too much, but we've actually been pretty good at touring.
Just playing music. Many jobs that you could find anyway that would let you work for like a week,
Nobody's gonna
10
hire
days,
us.
and then let you disappear for a month, you know?
Nobody's gonna hire me.
Did you ever hear that Bill Hicks joke? We were just talking about that stoner joke that Bill Hicks did about, sure, I could wake up at dawn, get in traffic, go to a job that I hate, that doesn't satisfy me creatively. Sure, I could do that. And he's like, or get up at noon and learn how to play the sitar. It's just like, we kind of have a combination. He's like, now.
Well, usually I get construction jobs, but my knee, I hyperextended my knee, so I had to go out. Hopefully I'm prep cooking and trying to help this bistro.
And both Bob and I are we don't work together, but we're both house painters, and probably have been since I've been since I was maybe 20.
The fact that I'm doing what I'm doing is like, it almost kind of like overshadows any sort of like, well, I'm broke this month, or, you know, it's like I just kind of keep on going. You know?
We're kind of in this back alley, which is cool because we're kind of this underground record store. You know, we don't pay attention to street dates on record releases of any of, like, you know, the new White Stripes or anything. I mean, we'll get in if we want to, you know, and it's like we just kind of do it totally on our own terms.
Money's paper. I wipe my ass with paper. You know, it's not that essential for my soul. You know, can't take it with you if I died tomorrow. Big deal. I have a lot of money that I didn't spend.
while doing Goat Snake, I reconnected with Steve O'Malley. He moved to Los Angeles, and so we basically came up with the concept of Sunn. Two dudes getting drunk and stoned and playing with as many amps as we possibly can, and basically just playing Melvins and Earth riffs, trying to play them slower than those bands played them.
Working with drone sounds in a musical context, I think historically has always been to sort of be able to meditate or transcend some sort of just waking phase.
I'm not like technically very good. I can't do a solo. I can't solo very well. I can't solo at all. But I really like to manipulate and work with tone and low tones and subtones.
I think it's actually working with some of the elements that are much older about music in general, which I think metal music also has. You know, as a folk music, it has, you know, things that probably were very similar in, you know, war music or tribalism or sort of this like amplifying energy state music.
Underground isn't underground anymore. Underground is, to me, like the new above ground, so to speak. Like it's just a lot of little labels that have sort of come together as a community, and you know, people now know how to access them and get the stuff that's on the labels a lot more than they used to be able to.
They're more sophisticated. They're smarter. They want, you know, they want something different, and like major labels aren't giving it to them. You know, indies are.
There's so many outlets. I mean, it's kind of a weird trade-off, because I mean, on one hand, the labels are pretty much vanishing. You don't have major labels signing bands. You pretty much a lot of times have to just release it on your own. But on the other hand, you can release it on your own, and you can keep all the money from it and not have it go to a record label and whatever. You record your own album at home, sell it on the internet, sell it at the concerts.
They're like kids in a candy store. They can kind of do whatever they want, you know, and it's great. I think that the fact that they're independent allows them to do that.
I think the best thing that's going on now is that people are starting to look for new influences and incorporate other stuff. And as music gets more and more accessible, old music, it gets more accessible. People are finding new things to be inspired by.
There's a lot of word of mouth, you know what I mean? And I think the internet is just to connect word of mouth, Square or Cube or whatever.
You get to a certain city in Germany or somewhere and people know who you are, you're like, fuck, how do they know? There's a fucking computer.
There's this scene or whatever it is, there's just these people that are hungry for decent music. Because the radio and commercial music is just, it's a nightmare.
The charts are dominated by, urban music, hip-hop, country, pop music, divas. There's always going to be an audience for the heavy rock, but you don't see it at the top of the charts. And that's fine.
That's just the way it's going to be, I guess, for this kind of music. It is very underground, and that's, I guess, what's kind of cool about it. We have, although some people that might want to make it big might not think it's cool, but I do. I don't really have any desire to be doing anything more.
You have to do it. There's no choice. Whether people hate it or people love it, it doesn't make a difference. You're doing it because you have to, because it makes sense of your reality, it makes sense of your day-to-day life, it makes sense of the world around you.
I mean, I know what we do is definitely out of what appeals to the masses these days, I guess. But I don't think it's from anything of not wanting to appeal to the masses. I think it's just hopefully, the ultimate goal would be to bring the masses along into something that, does take a lot more imagination, is focused on something with a little bit more depth.
Every period has its visionaries, and I think that some of the bands that we're talking about have that sense of wanting to be outside.
If you guys got very successful in a short period of time, you were playing arenas and stuff, would you be into that kind of lifestyle, you think?
Well, sure I would, but it hasn't happened yet, and I don't think it's gonna. Which it doesn't, I'm not throwing in a towel or something like that. I like to think that I keep myself a little ahead of the game, just musically, by sticking to my guns, and doing what I enjoy, and doing it masterfully and with no shame, no regrets about what I do.